Today, I'd like to fix Twilight because it sucked. And the more I hate read and watch the series, the more I think it really didn't have to. So let's fix Twilight to make it not suck. If you're anything like me, the first videos you watch of a new booktuber's channel is either a Twilight or an ACOTAR recap video, and while I have a lot of thoughts on both, today we're starting with Twilight. Fixing it, this should be a much shorter video than any deep dives that I may or may not do in the future. I recently stumbled upon a Reddit post, I know, in r/writing where some, like the original poster, asked how to go about writing dumb little stories like Twilight, since it's not considered literature, has no identifiable moral, and is, in my opinion, a dumb little story. It's a supernatural romance. Those are typically dumb little stories. And while there's nothing wrong with that, that's certainly what it is, right? There's no overarching question about the world being asked and answered. So imagine my surprise when all the comments on this post were just scolding the original poster about how Twilight was an international bestseller, so it can't be stupid, yada yada. And listen, if you genuinely liked it, you thought it was well written and engaging, no judgment from me, like what you like, but this is probably not the video for you. But feel free to hate watch, though, because I hate watch Twilight, so, solidarity. Anyway, that Reddit post kind of inspired this video, so let's get into it. Before I get into fixing Twilight, I'd like to go over what I think worked and what I'd keep. So, Bella as a human worked, kind of. Her being a bit socially inept worked. Her self-sacrificing trait could have worked had she had a single additional personality trait, so we'll keep it. And most importantly, when it comes to Bella as the protagonist of this supernatural romance, the idea that she's so uncomfortable and bad at being a human, so that when she becomes a vampire, that missing puzzle piece of herself finally slots into place works. She says at some point, I believe, that she felt like she was born to be a vampire. So I like that, and we'll keep it. The vampire world in general was okay. I like the idea of vampire vegetarians. We've seen this concept even recently in Baldur's Gate 3. And yes, Astarion is my favorite companion character, for the record. This does kind of detract from the existing good and scary vampire vibe that, things like Dracula and some other vampire media have kind of got going for it. But since this is a romance, I don't mind it. You could rewrite Twilight as a dark romance with Edward being an actual murderous vampire as a love interest if you just, walk him back emotionally to where he was when he was sort of rebelling against Carlisle, being the sort of murderer of murderers, and kind of go that route. Dark romance isn't really my vibe though, so I'm gonna leave that idea to the side for this. I also love the Volturi as the sort of mysterious and self-serving, like, political power, vampire coven that are all old enough to have really cemented that power for themselves and just kind of bathe in it for centuries. I think that's really cool. And they're all kind of, they're not quite morally gray. I think they're definitely evil, but in a really fun, in a fun way. So that works, and we'll keep it. And that's it. So let's talk about what didn't work. Okay. First, Bella's age and personality. I'm not going to elaborate. Also, the pacing, especially in the first book, but in all of them to a degree, is really, really bad. I'd like to get into this in a deep dive at some point. But huge stretches of pages go by without anything actually happening, and then the actual plot gets shoved into like the final 5 chapters. And I don't like that. The love triangle also just really missed the mark. I don't really like them very much at the best of times, but I've seen them done well. But this one almost doesn't even count, and I think we can fix it. Imprinting. I'm also not going to elaborate on this one. We'll get into it in a minute. Also, the vampires just aren't as cool as they could be. They're incomprehensibly powerful, very difficult to kill, even for other vampires. All of them are physically gorgeous, almost enchanting, and somehow they fall flat to me. I think the lore could be deeper, and I think we can fix it. So, let's start with Bella. First of all, she needs to be an adult. For the sake of the romance not being creepy and Edward being even slightly likable, she needs to not be a child, and he needs to not think of her as one. If we really wanted to keep the school context, we could make her college age, and that would kind of solve the problem of giving her a life goal outside of her love interest. I don't know if this is entirely necessary. There are a bunch of ways to kind of play into that forced proximity trope that the biology class serves in the first book. You could make Edward and Bella coworkers assigned to the same project, or maybe they both go to AA meetings. And then, with that, you've given both of them a history and a flaw. Or you could even have them go to the same gym at the same time. There are options. We also really need to make her a vampire sooner. And we'll get into this a little bit more when we talk about the vampire world, but we cannot make her ridiculously powerful right off the bat. Whether we decide newborns are actually somehow weaker than older vampires, or we just decide that she can't have superhuman self-control because the plot demands it, she really needs to earn something. Either way, as is, Bella being a human that everybody's keeping out of the action to keep her safe completely demolishes any kind of tension being built, especially by Eclipse, because we don't get to see any of that action. We hear about it from Edward or Jacob later, after it's already over, and that's incredibly boring. Um, Lastly, in the pursuit of creating a main female character that isn't a Mary Sue, she also needs a personality and a flaw that actually matters. As written, she's a klutz, which is actually, I think, a fine flaw to give a character, but the only time that really matters is when the plot needs it to. Like in New Moon, when she gets a paper cut, which spurs the entire plot of the book. But somehow that doesn't matter in the third book when she's trying to distract Victoria by injuring herself. And of course, it wouldn't matter in the fourth book because she's a vampire, so that flaw gets erased by the ethereal grace she's endowed with by merit of being a vampire. Point being, she needs a flaw that makes her interesting that won't get erased by turning into a vampire, but rather gets enhanced by it. So, for example, like if we make her a former alcoholic, maybe that stems from a personality trait of impulsivity, so that when she's a vampire, that impulsivity manifests itself as something else, like rushing headlong into danger and like abandoning her coven before they can make up a plan, and she just goes, something like that, right? Something that drives the plot that makes her a little more interesting. Also, just kind of a side note to tack on to the end of this character that should be a given, but her choices need to actually matter. This is relevant mostly to the love triangle, but so much of the plot is her responding to things instead of her choices driving the plot. And this is, I think, a problem of the genre. You see that a lot of times in horror novels, like the first 2 acts of a horror novel, that the main character is reacting to the haunting or, the world being plagued by werewolves or this, that, or the other. But then they learn and then they start actively impacting the plot. And I don't feel like that ever happens. And this isn't a horror novel. So that needs to happen way less. So, editing Ginger here, I just wanted to talk about this a teeny bit more. I do think that the only time this is done really well is in New Moon. So once Edward is gone, and the only way that Bella can feel like she's connected to him is by putting herself in danger. Once she figures that out, she does actively make choices that impact the plot that would not have happened had she not made those choices. And I do want to call that out because I like kind of I I kind of like how they did that. Um but I think it could maybe be tweaked. I don't I don't know. I don't like I think if she had been an adult, it would have been fine. But as an adult looking back, I don't like that they made a teenager put herself in that much danger to get a glimpse of a memory of a man. But I think had she been an adult with, like, in an adult relationship, it would have made a little bit more sense and also maybe played into that impulsivity a little bit. So I just wanted to point out that that was a thing that happened, that she, Bella Swan, the main character, drove by her choices that could not have happened had she not made those choices. So back to the video. Let's move on to the Cullens and vampires in general, but mostly the Cullens. First of all, I need more Rosalie. Specifically, Rosalie and Emmett's 15th wedding. It was teased in one of the books, I forget which, by Edward, and then never delivered upon. And I'm still upset. Knowing Rosalie, it would have been an awesome wedding and a great scene, and I want it. Give it to me, please. Also, vampires in most other universes have some kind of weakness, whether it's sunlight, running water, wooden stakes, garlic, etc. And the Twilight vampires need one. Just one would do. The vampires take a bit of an oddly scientific turn in Twilight. Carlisle explains that they have 25 chromosome pairs instead of the typical 23, which I am not a geneticist. I don't know exactly what level of completely unrealistic that is. So I'm not going to talk about that too much. But okay, without the supernatural flavor and going into the evolved predator direction. Maybe not, probably not the running water, and certainly not needing permission to enter a home. But even if they're the apex predator evolved to hunt humans, that doesn't mean that they shouldn't have a single weak point. Um, I think it would be good to remember that, even in nature, this happens where, a group of otters can take down an alligator if they're fast enough and angry enough. So whether it should remain pretty difficult and like nigh impossible, a group of humans with the right knowledge and the right equipment should be able to take down a single vampire, but as written, that's just not possible. Not only should they have a weakness, I also don't think that they should all be physically beautiful, like physically attractive. This is another one of those kind of predator-prey, hand-wavy sort of things from the books, that all vampires are physically appealing in order to trick people, prey, into getting close to them. Um, but people lure other people in with more than just looks all the time. I'd love a vampire with a magnetic personality, or maybe some hypnotism powers. That could be cool. Also, we're ditching the sparkle. Um, if we're operating from the evolutionary predator-prey scientific vampire perspective, the sparkle serves no evolutionary purpose that I can think of, and I don't like it. So we're doing away with that. Okay, while we're on the topic of supernatural creatures, time for the wolves. The biggest issue I have here is imprinting, obviously. Um, in Romantasy today, the fated mate trope taken at face value still kind of remains a little bit icky to me. I've seen it done reasonably well. So if we change how it's treated here, I think it could work. If we keep the concept, have the wolf packs include male and female shifters, and then have imprinting happen between adult members of those packs, you know, hand waved away by, like, to keep the lines strong or something, and then treat that as a problem to be solved within the wolf packs, because obviously, you know, feelings and some other force dictating who you're meant to be with are going to clash. Suddenly, this becomes less creepy and more interesting. Um, it could be narratively relevant. If it comes up in the narrative, I say we keep it. Anyway. Okay. The love triangle. For a love triangle to work, Jacob needs to be a real option for Bella as a partner in order to be a threat to Edward and Bella. In the books, Bella is very clearly never truly considering Jacob as a partner over Edward, so in my opinion, there's never any real tension here as to who she's going to choose. There's one moment in Eclipse where she imagines what her life would be like if she had chosen Jacob. Children, mortality, something more normal, at least by comparison. But by this point, I think she's already engaged to Edward. So I think this should happen way sooner. And that way, Bella's choice in the love triangle becomes less of a choice between men and more of a choice between futures. But her choosing Edward needs to matter. So we're cutting the pregnancy storyline altogether. Big surprise. I know that's a really unpopular um, element of these books, but I agree. I would cut it. I also think this ties into Bella being an adult with dreams and desires independent of her love interests, but for the love of God, both love interests can't ignore Bella's agency constantly, and then the narrative cannot romanticize it. It's weird. I don't like it. Okay, which brings me to my final point, the plot. 4 books is too many for the amount of stuff that actually happens. Twilight takes 180 something pages for Bella to confirm Edward is a vampire, and that we knew from the back of the book. That's too long. By the time we get the full wolf legend in Eclipse, read info dump, we've already gotten most of that information at least 2 different times. I would truncate a good portion of both Twilight and New Moon and then kind of smush them together to set up for the events of Eclipse. So instead of a paper cut, the catalysts for the Cullens leaving could be Bella's injuries from James, which Edward threatens to leave her over at the end of Twilight anyway. Maybe they're going to explain themselves. And Bella's presence to the Volturi before Victoria can out them as revenge for killing James. Then the big climactic moment can be similar to New Moon's, but without the suicide element. Thwarted Victoria could try something else, and then the bulk of Eclipse could remain the same, with minor tweaks. And then when Bella injures herself to distract Victoria and Riley in that big climactic moment, maybe her injuries are more severe than she thought they'd be. Maybe one of the evil vampires gets a good swipe in and they can't make it to Carlisle in time. And then that's the big life-threatening injury that finally pushes Edward into turning Bella once he finally realizes that by turning her, he is protecting her. And this is the book where we should get Rosalie and Emmett's wedding. Breaking Dawn can start with Bella adjusting to life as a vampire, with her dealing with the choice being made for her, even though it was a choice she wanted. And then the main conflict between the vampire and the wolves, because the treaty was broken. But then they still have to unite against the Volturi, maybe because the Volturi plan to use that unrest as an excuse to eliminate the Cullens, something about drawing the attention of the humans in Forks. And then the interpersonal conflict between Bella and Jacob, as he removes herself from her consideration over the vampire versus werewolf general animosity, and then also between Bella and Edward, as they both have to wrestle with the doubt of their bond, because, after all, did Bella choose him for him, or because he was the only choice left? But once the main conflict which needs to be an actual conflict, by the way, and not just a fake out and not just a fake out via Alice. I feel really strongly about this. Once that main conflict goes down and the fight really begins, they can prove they're loyal to each other. Um, and that goes more than just skin deep. I also think Alice should die. Not because I don't like her, but for the drama. Imagine her disappearing and rallying forces, all the while plagued with the vision of her own death, but still choosing her found family over her own life. Like I said, for the drama. So, with that, I think we fixed it. Um, yeah. Thanks for coming on this journey with me. Um, now that I've done this, I kind of want to do. I'm kind of tempted to do a like a plot mapping of how this would actually go. Um, but we'll see. We'll see what I have the time and the energy for. Uh, anyway, if you think that Twilight could be fixed in a different way, please let me know. I'm actually so obsessed with these books because I kind of hate them, but they're so much fun to read because I hate them so much. So I love talking about them, and I love consuming content about them. So if you have any thoughts, let me know. And go read Twilight again, I guess. Oh boy, they are they're pretty bad. But you know what? I understand why they were an international phenomenon because there's something about them. I just can't stop thinking about them because I hate them so much. Anyway, thank you. I'm going to end this video here.